Section 1. You will hear a conversation about different options for travelling to France. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Good morning.
Hi,
How can I help you?
I'm looking for information about travelling to France. I'm studying in Nice next year and need to go there in September. I'm thinking of driving, so I guess it's either through the Channel or by ferry. I think the ferry's a lot slower, isn't it?
Indeed it is. It takes around 9 hours from London to Paris, including the overland bits. And usually it's more expensive too, unless you book well ahead of time. Then sometimes the ferry's more affordable.
The answer is September, so the time of travel has been filled in for you. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good morning.
Hi,
How can I help you?
I'm looking for information about travelling to France. I'm studying in Nice next year and need to go there in September. I'm thinking of driving, so I guess it's either through the Channel or by ferry. I think the ferry's a lot slower, isn't it?
Indeed it is. It takes around 9 hours from London to Paris, including the overland bits. And usually it's more expensive too, unless you book well ahead of time. Then sometimes the ferry's more affordable.
How much does it cost?
Well, when you take the train and the ferry now, you must buy your tickets separately.
Actually, I'd prefer to take the Channel. How much does that cost?
That depends on your travel date and availability of tickets, but you can expect to pay about £50 each way for the car, in addition to your passenger fares.
It's not cheap.
No. Will you be using your car a lot while you're in France?
Not really. But I'll have a lot of luggage, so it seems like the easiest way. Besides, I hate flying.
Driving is never the easiest way to get from the UK to France, I'm afraid. And of course, your steering wheel will be on the wrong side when you get there. If you're not going to need your car when you arrive, may I suggest leaving it at home and travelling by train? It's much faster, more affordable, and you can take as much luggage as you need. There aren't limits.
Oh, I didn't know that about the luggage. That's good. It would certainly be more relaxing, I suppose. OK, tell me about the train.
It's definitely the most popular option these days. Eurostar has now captured over 70% of the London to Paris market from the airlines. And maybe this has something to do with the fact that 92.4% of Eurostar trains run on time, against just 65% of flights on the same routes. From central London to central Paris, Eurostar is faster than flying as well.
And the Eurostar is what exactly? A train company?
Oh, sorry. The Eurostar is the high-speed passenger train that runs from London to Paris via the Channel Tunnel. Eurostar can reach 186 miles per hour, and the journey takes just 2 hours 15 minutes.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
All right, so it's easy to get to Paris, but what about Nice? It's a fair bit farther.
Yes, but it couldn't be easier. There are two main options. You can leave London at 7:27 in the morning, then transfer in Paris to catch the TGV train at 11:46, which takes about 5.5 hours, and be in Nice in time for an evening meal. Or you can take any Eurostar to Paris in time to catch the 22:25 from Paris, which arrives in Nice at 8:54. It's a longer journey, but many people prefer the convenience of travelling overnight.
Yes, that appeals to me. About how much does the overnight journey cost?
The example I've pulled up on the computer now costs £135 return, but sometimes it's lower, as low as £97. I'll write down a couple of website addresses for you, and you can search for various times and fares on your own.
Thanks, that's great. Oh, one more thing. I'll need a single fare because I won't be returning for a while. Is that going to be more expensive?
No, don't worry. Singles are approximately half of the return fare, though this wasn't true several years ago, when it wasn't uncommon for a return to be cheaper than a single.
Okay, this sounds good. But what about flying? Is that an option?
If you aren't going to opt for taking the train, flying is another good option. While the train's the fastest way to travel from London to Paris, you can actually save time by opting to fly from London to the south of France.
I guess there's an airport in Nice, isn't there?
Yes, the Nice Côte d'Azur airport. It's about 7 kilometres from the centre of Nice. Since it's the third most important airport in France, after Charles de Gaulle and Orly in Paris, there's no shortage of flights.
Oh. Do you know exactly how long it takes?
2 hours.
That's quick.
Yes, but you need to consider that you'll lose time checking in and waiting to collect luggage and such. And of course, there's a baggage allowance.
True. All right. Thanks very much for your help. I've got a lot to think about now.
No problem at all. Feel free to come back if you have more questions.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2. Part 2.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I understand that you all own your own home, and some of you may be interested in buying additional property here in the city, so I hope you will find the information I am going to share with you useful and informative. I'm going to talk about the situation with property here in the city. The city centre of any area is obviously going to have the highest prices, and as more and more people are competing for houses in this area, both renting and buying are becoming increasingly difficult. It is most people's dream to one day own their own house. House ownership gives us a feeling of having achieved something, and we can see clearly what we have worked so hard for all our lives. It can give us a sense of security for our old age and a knowledge that we will hopefully have something to pass on to our children. However, buying a house, particularly for first-time buyers, is becoming more and more difficult, not only due to increasing prices, but also because of the need for a substantial deposit. For younger people, buying their first home is very difficult and often impossible. Young couples who cannot get the deposit together need to rent for a long time and sometimes forever. While traditionally, homes near the centre of the city have been the most desirable, people are now looking further afield. This has happened for a number of reasons, the main one being that our style of work is changing, along with that of other countries such as the USA. In certain professions, for example sales and computing, it is no longer necessary for people to be based in an office full-time. More and more people are beginning to work from home, which means they can avoid the hustle and bustle of rush hour traffic jams into work and have more freedom to choose to live in a more rural and peaceful location. My company deals with finding property for both purchasers and renters in the city area. One of my main roles within the company is to find investment properties for people who wish to plan ahead for their future.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
An investment property is usually at the cheaper end of the market. People buy investment properties not to live in, but in addition to their own home in order to rent it out to other people. The advantage of putting your savings into property for the future is that you can be pretty certain that, as a long-term investment, your money will safely increase in value in line with inflation. Many people are turning to property investment instead of pension schemes, as we hear the horror stories of countries such as the UK, where people have invested all their lives into their pension schemes to find that now their money is relatively worthless. Houses automatically earn what is known as capital gains. That is, for every year you own the property, it becomes more valuable and often gives a better rate of interest on your money than most banks do. However, that is not to say there are no risks. There are people who buy property when the market is high and prices are inflated beyond their true value, only to find that when the housing market slows down, they are in a state of negative equity. Negative equity is a situation that arises when you owe more for the house than the house itself is worth. In short, the best advice is to be aware of the ups and downs of the housing market. Property investment, if handled correctly, can be enormously satisfying. I hope that this has given you an insight into the basics of the property market. Thank you for listening. Please raise your hand if you have any questions and I will try to be of assistance.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a conversation between the advisor and an overseas student. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 30. Good afternoon. How can I help you?
Good afternoon. My name is Helena Schwartz. I have an appointment at 3.
Ah, yes. Come in. Please take a seat. Now, what can I do for you?
Well, I need some advice about my studies. I'm a foreign student from Germany, and, well, I heard that this is the place to come.
It certainly is. So, what kind of problems are you having? It's quite normal for students to meet problems, particularly overseas students who might not be familiar with the British way of life or education system.
Well, my first problem is the workload.
That's a common problem, even with British students.
It seems to me that the biggest difference between university and secondary school is that university students have to do a lot of work on their own, and it's sometimes useful to get advice on how to take control of your time and work effectively.
You're right. The obvious thing to do is to make a schedule and stick to it. Bear in mind that there is enough time to do the work and enough time for extracurricular activities.
You mean that I shouldn't overload myself?
Right. But moreover, be careful to spread your work out over the weeks and months. Don't do anything for a while, then get worried because you have little time to get assignments finished.
Yes, that's clear.
We get a lot of students coming to us with that problem, so we've produced a leaflet about it. You should have received one during orientation, but sometimes, well, here you are.
Thank you. I'll read it carefully later.
Okay, and feel free to come back if you have any questions about it.
Okay. My second problem is with research.
Are you going to complain that the library isn't open at the weekends?
How did you guess?
We get so many students complaining about that. We're trying to get that changed, but, well, to be honest, the library staff already work long shifts, and unless we can get extra staff, the library has to remain closed at the weekends.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions.
I understand, but...
I know. It makes organising your time even more important. Make sure that you get all the books you need from the library before the weekend. Then devote some of your weekend time to making notes from the books at the weekend.
The problem is that I'm easily distracted when I'm working at home rather than in the library.
Well, an alternative strategy is to work longer hours during the week, when the library is open, and do no work at all at the weekends. Sometimes it's very useful to forget about studies for a day or two each week.
Yes, that might be better for me. I can concentrate on my work in the library and then leave the weekends free. Also, I have some problems with my essay assignments. Could you have a look at these and tell me what you think?
Certainly. I see. Well, even if you plan your writing carefully, this can come to nothing if the assignment doesn't actually answer the question. That really is the most important thing to remember. You must read the question extremely carefully and give it a great deal of thought before you even start planning or writing your first draft. It's also essential to check your work for errors. Everybody makes them, and they can influence the professor marking the work. So always take time at the end to check what you have written. Many overseas students ask a British student to check their work for them. I have a short list of people who will do this for a small fee if you'd like it.
That's okay. I have several British friends. I'm sure I can bribe them to check my grammar and spelling.
Good. Anything else?
Yes, there is. I find it hard to keep up sometimes in lectures. Do you have any tips for me? I was thinking of recording them using an MP3 player. Then I can listen to it again afterwards and...
Well, a lot of people find them useful, but some people point out that you might never actually have time to listen to the recording again. Something else you could try is checking your notes with a friend after the lecture. Go for a coffee or something.
Yes, that's a good idea. Thanks. Thank you very much for your help.
That's what I'm here for.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
River dance is an expression of modern Irish culture, but it is based on a culture which had its golden era from the 6th to the 9th century. Before that period, Irish culture was oral and based on a love of complicated stories and poetic styles. But in the 6th century, something wonderful happened. Writing was introduced by missionaries. From then on, the culture of Ireland began to develop in ways impossible before, and had considerable influence in Northern Europe in the period up to the 9th century. With the invasions which began in the 9th century, this golden age collapsed, and there never was any real recovery. There were no wealthy kings to sponsor the poets and scholars, so the tradition survived only in a form which the peasants liked. The love of story and song did not die, but no real attempt was made to find a distinctive Irish style until the end of the 19th century, when Irish nationalism began to influence writers, in English called Anglo-Irish literature. There are many famous writers from that period. There is also William Butler Yeats, George Bernard Shaw, and Samuel Beckett, all of whom have received the Nobel Prize for Literature. In all, Ireland has received the Nobel Literature Prize 4 times. When you consider we have only a population half the size of Beijing, you see how unusual that is. Now, let me talk about the music. The Irish love of music has succeeded in surviving the change from Irish, the native language, to the language of the invader, and has once more begun to blossom and become influential outside the country. Irish music was reduced to being the language of the country people and was dying out as people moved to the cities. Young city people did not want to listen to peasant music, although we were all told it was important. Some efforts were made to make it attractive to city people, but largely without success. More recently, this has begun to change, and since the 1980s has taken off. But modern Ireland has been looking for more than just a revival of traditional music. Many of the most famous popular singers in the world are Irish. U2, Enya, the Cranberries, and many others. There are 10,000 people employed in Ireland in the music industry. River dance is an expression of that new interest in the old and that ability to understand the new.
That is the end of Part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.